Did you know that Ethiopia is a leader in climate action in Africa, spearheading initiatives like the Green Legacy Initiative and recently launching its nationally determined contribution, implementation plan, and long-term low-emission development strategy to achieve sustainable growth by 2050? Key efforts include promoting e-mobility, banning fossil fuel-based vehicle imports, increasing forest cover, advancing climate-smart agriculture, and reinforcing a strong commitment to clean, renewable energy through mega hydroelectric projects. Join me in the finale episode of Ethiopia in Focus as I speak with Dr. Fitsum Assefa, Minister of Planning, about Ethiopia's progress in advancing climate solutions and its financing needs for a sustainable future.
Dr. Fitsum, welcome again in our discussion today on climate finance and Ethiopia's efforts and aspirations in terms of addressing climate change. So the formal international climate agenda has been very active for the past 4 decades. So much has been said, a lot of international agreements, a lot of commitments have been made, but still we're not meeting the global demand, and particularly for developing countries like Ethiopia that are quite vulnerable to climate change. It means a lot for these kind of agendas to bear fruit and bear shape. Over the past 6 years, through Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's leadership, one could actually say that Ethiopia has been at the forefront of the climate agenda. And I understand that there's been so many comprehensive initiatives that Ethiopia has undertaken. So let's start the conversation with you unpacking what are some of these comprehensive climate agenda initiatives that Ethiopia has undertaken in order to build a climate resilient economy.
Thank you, Vilu. So, as you have mentioned, there has been lots of discussions on issue of climate. Some even deny that climate change exists. Some take it as some alien or some fancy word that you go around and, hold discussions about it, hold big conferences about it. But for Ethiopia, it's a present and immediate challenge for our lives and livelihoods of our people. So it's an everyday challenge. So for us, there is no alternative to being climate smart and building resilience. So that's why we have been working on those grand initiatives that I will mention a few as we go along. Of course, global pact and global collective actions are undeniably important because climate change affects everyone. Even if some of the emissions come from some of the most developed countries, the impacts are more felt in countries like ours, where adaptive capacity is very low. So for us, we appreciate the collective global actions, and we respond to that through, commitments like having nationally determined contributions and updating those contributions. We have already submitted our ambition of reducing 68% of emissions as compared to the business as usual practice by 2030. So this is the nationally determined contribution. And also, we have also put our vision of building net zero economy by 2050 by developing long-term low-emission development strategy. So these are, of course, the plan and the vision, which will just be as good as the paper unless we act. So that's why, through those grand initiatives by our Prime Minister, more specifically, we're really working on real actions on the ground. One of it would be the biggest afforestation program, globally, which is our Green Legacy Initiative, which helped us plant billions of trees, 40.1 billion trees over the past 6 years. Also, the impacts of this Green Legacy Initiative are huge. It's not just any other tree planting exercise, because it has significant impact on food security as well. because billions of those trees are fruit-bearing trees. Ethiopia has started exporting avocado just because of Green Legacy Initiative, just to mention one. But also the forest cover has increased by 6 percentage points in just 5 years, from 2019 to 2023. It was 17.2%, and now it has reached to 23.6%. This is huge progress in just 5 years. Of course, we usually mention the forest cover and the number of trees, but because of Green Legacy Initiative, deforestation has reduced significantly by more than 50%. The rate of deforestation in Ethiopia used to be 92,000 hectares per year, but now it's around 27,000 hectares.
Those are some substantial numbers.
Exactly, huge numbers. So,
and it has also mobilized how many people annually?
More than 20 million people, and from all walks of life, from kids to elderly, the clergy, everyone participated in these Green Legacy initiatives every summer, and now it has become second nature to everyone. Culture. So it has changed the culture, it has changed the mindset. So everyone now thinks being green is really important, and we are also seeing the impacts. So Green Legacy Initiative in just few of its impacts.
You would say, when we look at, because I was saying for the past 4 decades, the climate agenda has been quite active. How is Green Legacy a tangible, or would you say it's a very tangible and practical way of addressing climate change issues?
Exactly, it is. Because, of course, for us, for a country like Ethiopia that has a huge development gap, investing in mitigation, like climate action is either mitigation or adaptation, right? So mostly, most countries would prefer to go for adaptation, but for us, planting tree, and its impacts won't be bounded by the boundaries that we have. The one tree that we have planted here in Ethiopia has far-reaching, impact. I always say it's a gift to the world that we are giving, and we are doing it pro bono. The investments. Our Prime Minister always says, if we assume a tree costs us just $1, which is even far more than $1, so we have already contributed 40 billion US dollars to the mitigation actions that the world really seeks in terms of really saving Mother Earth. So this has a huge impact in terms of creating jobs, for instance, mostly for women and youth. More than 1 million green jobs were created because of the Green Legacy Initiative. As I've said earlier, it's not any other tree planting exercise. It has significant portion of the trees are fruit-bearing trees. Agroforestry, livelihood improvements, income generation for the farmers, the smallholder households, and the youth. Huge impact in that regard as well, in addition to really making our environment more resilient to climate change.
So we were Green Legacy being one of the initiatives. Any other comprehensive initiatives that Ethiopia is part of or that is active in that you would like to explore at this point?
Yes. There is also another initiative, a grand initiative, which relates to building resilience in Ethiopia's food system. So one of the impacts of climate change is, extreme weather events like drought and flood, which goes against resilience in agriculture sector. So lots of millions of people have been displaced, for instance, in some parts of the country because of drought. And floods have also affected, several other corners of the country, landslides recently. So these all have a toll on the economy, but mostly on the food security stance of the country. So building resilient food system and several initiatives under this, resilient food system, one of which being our wheat revolution. So the National Wheat Program, which really turned Ethiopia to be wheat surplus from being wheat deficit country just probably 5 years ago. In this regard, we always see the output, but the steps that we took to really reach at being wheat surplus are usually forgotten, but I really want to mention them here, one of which would be investing in research and development of heat-resistant wheat varieties, which is climate adaptation action. So our researchers have invested a lot of their knowledge, and the government has also invested lots of finance. Of course, development partners have also supported these programs. So heat-resistant wheat varieties, but at the same time, we had invested on irrigation as well. So small-scale irrigation, from water harvesting to pumps and big dams, big irrigation dams and irrigation infrastructure, which made it possible to cultivate, millions of hectares, which used to stay idle during the off-season, non-rainy seasons. So in this, because of this, we have managed to be, Africa's top wheat-producing country. Just last year, from the off-season as well as the main season wheat production, we have managed to produce 230 million quintals of wheat. This year, we even expect more than 230 million quintals. Another initiative that comes under, building resilient food system is the Yalemat Trufat or the Bounty of Basket initiative. Most of our emission in Ethiopia comes from the livestock sector. For your surprise, actually, it's not like the factories, so because of the unsustainable way of and mode of production of livestock. So we have huge livestock number.
One of the largest exporters as well.
One of the largest exporters as well. So what Yalemat Trufat does is, converting that into, more modern way of production, be it dairy or poultry, fish production, and honey production as well. So this Yalemat Trufat initiative, of course, our Prime Minister's initiative, has really made the livestock production sector more modern and sustainable, with less emissions. In one hand, addressing food security challenge, but in the other, reducing emissions from the livestock production sector, making it more sustainable.
Let me intervene over here, and we'll come back to programs, particularly climate solutions in energy and infrastructure, and water. But I want us to go a little bit back into the overarching framework or policy frameworks that enable climate solutions for Ethiopia.
For us, as I've said earlier, climate is not just some fancy word or some alien that we have a separate document, in a separate plan, or a separate institution to work on it. For us, climate is an everyday challenge. Climate change is an everyday challenge, so which means it's an everyday development activity. So that's why, from the governance and institutional mechanism itself, climate portfolio is organized under the Ministry of Planning and Development, so that it's perfectly mainstreamed in our sectoral plans, be it long-term, medium-term, or short-term, in programs and projects and activities. So from the governance structure itself, climate is well incorporated into the development plans. I can mention the 10 years development plan, for instance, It has 10 strategic pillars. One of the strategic pillars is building climate resilient green economy. So if a strategic pillar is, crafted in some way, that strategic pillar needs several programs and projects under it. So building climate resilient green economy has several programs under it.
And I was noticing that it has actually specific targets in terms of reducing emissions. So that's quite, for a developing country, it's quite not ambitious, but also very progressive.
Exactly. For instance, in the short run, for being climate smart and investing in climate actions costs. Of course, long-term benefits are there. So deciding to be climate smart and investing in climate actions it really takes commitment, from government. So it's really smart and progressive for a country, for a developing country like Ethiopia to be climate smart. Our the actions, you said we'll talk later about the energy and infrastructure, all really speak to that progressive thinking and vision of building resilient green economy. So from the vision itself, from the 10-year development plan, the long-term vision, to the detailed annual plans. There are several programs in the agriculture sector, for instance, agriculture growth program, resilient agricultural practices, the watershed management, and the degraded land rehabilitation program, which mobilizes millions of our smallholder farmers. Ethiopia, for instance, through that program, successfully rehabilitated 7 million hectares of land, which was degraded and out of order for long, now reclaimed. Some went into cultivation through, regenerative agriculture, also some for forest purposes and other land use purposes. So there are several programs in the agriculture and food security sector. Of course, other sectors as well. Programs in the energy sector, for instance. Programs in the transport and logistic sector, which strictly speak to our climate resilience vision.
So we can come back and unpack a little bit in terms of the programs that Ethiopia is engaged in energy, infrastructure, and water.
Energy, for instance. Globally, when we talk about energy and climate resilience, the discourse is about just energy transition, because most countries source their energy from non-renewable sources of fossil fuel. For us, that's not the case. For us, almost 100% of our electricity comes from hydro and other renewable sources like wind and solar. For us, the challenge is universal electrification and access to electricity in rural areas, considering that Ethiopia's, huge land cover and, of course, Ethiopia's scattered way of settlement in rural areas especially. So for us, 100% of our electricity comes from hydro and other renewable sources. For anyone who wants to, for instance, invest in energy sector, it would really be easy to access climate finance, for instance. Anyone who wants to, for instance, work on universal electrification, solar sources of energy, who wants to invest on wind energy sources, smart irrigation, for instance, which is powered by solar energy sources. So Ethiopia is perfectly fit for that with the completion of our Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, for instance. We have proved our readiness for green industrialization, green way of doing things, green production and consumption. So energy sources are 100% green in Ethiopia. Of course, when it comes to water as well, Ethiopia has lots of water, but unless we work, in a sustainable way in terms of our consumption of our water and protect our water bodies, the lakes that we have and the rivers. Water shortage of course, is not very far away to happen in Ethiopia as well. So that's why we have a comprehensive water management program. We have a regulatory framework and an institutional mechanism to protect our water bodies and, of course, sustainable use of our water. One of which, for instance, is the riverside projects. It's meant for protecting our rivers in Addis, for instance. Of course, this
and protecting communities from flooding as well.
Exactly, protecting communities from flood as well. So this is one, but we have 12 river basins. These all 12 river basins with probably one, the biggest river in Africa as well as in the world. So the Nile River, right? So that basin also has its own plan, its own institutional mechanism that protects the buffer zones of the river, also the tributaries to the river as well. A couple of days ago, I was at Toto Park, really checking out the mountain as well and the forest.
Part of Addis for some of our viewers who don't know where Toto is.
Exactly. So several tributaries to the Awash Basin and to the Nile Basin begin from that mountain. So, the things that are being done by the city administration as well as by our Prime Minister's initiative of corridor development are really amazing. Protecting the forest and the land and soil, and of course changing the forest cover to indigenous, more sustainable type of trees is amazing in terms of really recharging our rivers, recharging our groundwater, at the same time protecting our water bodies. So our agricultural practice, our irrigation to be modernized, and really new technologies, water-saving technologies to be introduced are really doing well in terms of saving water. Of course, we have to do a lot in that regard. Most of our irrigation is somehow unsustainable. Yes, but now we are investing in technologies and introduce several policy incentives for anyone who wants to invest in water-saving irrigation technologies. So from institutional mechanism to legal frameworks, we are really bringing the water sector as well to more sustainable water use, more protective kind of water use scenarios. So we are also working on that as well. Infrastructure is another area where Ethiopia is investing a lot to make our infrastructure more resilient, but at the same time really climate smart and environmentally sensitive. In that regard, for instance, our city rehabilitation program is one. We usually call it corridor development, where we are really making our infrastructure more sustainable, more green. Also our transport and mobility being more green, so to speak.
Can you expand on that? Because it's quite progressive, particularly for still developing nation, to make that kind of a milestone.
Exactly. Land is an expensive economic commodity, so it has a very expensive opportunity cost when you decide to make a given parcel of land a public space, park. You are foregoing, the amount that you could have earned by selling through lease, or through rent. So for a country like Ethiopia, which needs huge finance to fill the development gap, deciding to be such environmentally sustainable country is really progressive, as you mentioned below.
And in transport as well.
Yes.
What are some of the initiatives that we're seeing over the past year or so within the transport sector?
As part of the initiative and the vision to be to instill sustainable production and consumption in all our activities. One of the things that Ethiopia has done, which makes her the first country to ban, autos that use fuel.
The import of
fuel, fuel cars, and really give incentive, tax incentive to import electric vehicles, and also, of course, produce and assemble electric vehicles at home. So this makes Ethiopia the first country to explicitly do that through policy, and now we are seeing the impacts. Now we are seeing thousands of electric vehicles in Addis and elsewhere in other cities in the country. So this is also one of the decisions that makes Ethiopia more progressive when it comes to climate action.
So Ethiopia, in terms of addressing the climate agenda, there are strategies, there are policies in place, and there are tangible programs as well and initiatives. All these need to be financed. So let's talk about what are the instruments that are currently available in terms of financing climate action.
Yes. For us, because as I've said earlier, being climate smart has no choice. We are investing anyway, whether the world responds as expected or not. But it's really disappointing when it comes to global, collective action in terms of climate finance, availing accessible and affordable finance for climate investments. We were expecting for long, after especially the Paris Agreement 15 years ago, public finance in terms of grants and concessional loans to be availed for countries like Ethiopia, which has almost nothing to do with climate change, but being affected more than proportionately by the impacts. But as the time goes on, it has become clear that such finance, public finance in terms of grants and concessional loans are dwindling, and they have never been enough in the first place. So now there are emerging climate finance options available. So we have to prepare for that. We have to be ready to tap into that. But for instance, some finances like green bonds, countries can issue green bonds to finance some projects and programs that are climate, smart, in mitigation, in adaptation projects, in renewable energy, for instance, sustainable water supply, climate smart infrastructure. So there are several other options. For instance, other emerging finance would be blended finance, where finance from development partners is blended with the private sector. Finance from the partners is used to de-risk, investment by the private sector in countries like Ethiopia, so that they come and invest in such climate mitigation and adaptation works. For Ethiopia, as I've said earlier, Ethiopia is more than ready for such investments, because in all the sectors, be it energy or agriculture, food security, we have everything in place. So, but we still need support from development partners to do the last mile, legal frameworks and institutional mechanisms, capacity building, so to speak, to tap into such finances. There are other finances as well. For instance, for small holder farmers, like microfinance kind of climate finances, also insurances for smallholder farmers to insure their risk and vulnerabilities to climate risks like floods and drought, which are not new for Ethiopia. It's even happening more frequently than ever. So there are several financing options globally, but there is this shift from the official development assistance kind of financing to more private and innovative new financing ways for climate actions.
So, I mean, I came across data that indicates that the estimated global climate investment gap is USD 6.1 trillion per year needed by 2030. And particularly, again, 4 decades of coming into developing common targets, but we still have this kind of a huge deficit to fill. So what are some of the barriers when it comes to accessing these climate funds?
Yes, as you have said rightly, so the gap is around 6 trillion. The discussions and the negotiations, for instance, on COPs, just the recent COP, for instance, we were just pushing, for instance, for 1.3 trillion, but the world said no. So the maximum
for the developing world, because there's a commitment by the developing world that needs to be made for developing countries.
Yes, so we are now at 300 billion. Which is not even qualified, so to speak. So it might not even happen. We just have the numbers on the paper. So it's disappointing in that regard, but even the available finance is not accessible. So availability doesn't guarantee that a country like Ethiopia can have access to that finance. There are several barriers to that. One is the internal barriers. Let me start from there because we have to address them as well. Putting proper institutional mechanisms and legal frameworks. For instance, carbon trade has been there for long. We are accessing a bit of it because we couldn't make proper policy instruments and legal framework to ensure proper flow of traders, carbon traders in our market.
But Ethiopia has a huge potential.
Huge potential.
You mentioned the 6% leap in the past 5 years through the Green Legacy Initiative itself.
Imagine the billions of trees that are, sequestering carbon, but we're not utilizing that. And because this is, I said, let me start from internal because this is our weakness. We have to prepare legal framework that ensures proper and smooth carbon trading in the, with anyone interested.
And is there an appetite on the other end for carbon trade?
Huge appetite, huge appetite. So that's why just recently we have launched a pilot. Of course, we have already prepared the legal framework. We have launched it, and we are testing it with some energy projects. And very soon we'll have a full-fledged, comprehensive carbon trade platforms and institutional mechanism in place. Strategies are also being finalized for the carbon trade. So there is finance, global finance that we can utilize through carbon trade, but internally we were not ready until recently. So that's one internal issue. Another one is capacity in terms of, crafting, identifying proper and bankable, projects that command really good finance from elsewhere. So that's also one of the challenges, but we are working on that. And now we are really better in terms of really coming up with that capacity. Looking into the external challenge, the global financing architecture itself has been a challenge. As you know, Billu, our Prime Minister, has always calls on the global community and the financial institutions to really reform this architecture so that developing country like Ethiopia access finance easily. So the architecture has lots of barriers. For instance, the risk appetite that this architecture puts in place effectively excludes Ethiopia from utilizing Ethiopia and countries like Ethiopia from tapping into such finances. The rating agencies, the criteria that they put and the ranks that they give to countries like Ethiopia are so unfair that investors and even development partners really think twice before deciding to come with their investment to Ethiopia. So the global financing architecture needs reform. The risk appetite needs to be rethinked. Of course, development partners and the international community should put aside finance to de-risk, the private sector investment to flow to countries like Ethiopia to build resilient economy. So such barriers, internal and external barriers. Of course, procedural requirements are also lengthy process, very cumbersome, and so such things also need to be reformed.
So when it comes to what you had mentioned earlier, the different kinds of financing instruments that are available, you had mentioned the role of the private sector. And with Ethiopia's new economic reforms that have been underway, really creating a much more conducive business environment over the past 6 months, we could say a lot has also transpired, particularly in the economic sector. What are the incentives and the opportunities for green investments in Ethiopia?
There are several incentives and opportunities for green investments, especially by the private sector in Ethiopia. As I have mentioned earlier, in Ethiopia, several of the production and consumption activities are, really speaks to climate action, resilience. So the government has already started creating the enabling environment for the private sector to invest in, for instance, the energy sector. In terms of production, for now we have more than enough, even surplus energy production from hydro. The remaining would be investing in transmission lines and of course diversifying to other renewable energy sources of solar and wind, which Ethiopia is really, positioned in really strategic location in terms of accessing the solar 12 months a year. Of course, we have 13 months of sunshine, right? So in terms of wind as well, Ethiopia is one of the high potential countries. So access to electricity, access to energy, renewable energy is huge potential in terms of investment. In terms of incentive for that, several policy incentives. Of course, the public-private partnership is guided by a policy, public-private partnership policy, led by Ministry of Finance, and appropriate institutional mechanism is put in place. So in terms of risk sharing, the government is open for any private sector who would like to invest in these sectors. There are also successful deals that we have struck with, investors from Saudi Arabia, investors from UAE. Of course, there are also public investments, so to speak, in the energy sector. Other incentives of duty-free importation of equipments, machineries, and required inputs from abroad, in addition to the biggest incentive of floating birr and removing the currency convertibility challenge and profit repatriation. So these are the incentives in place, but any emerging request from any investor who is interested to invest in green developments in Ethiopia, we are free to discuss on them as long as they are really strategic. In all our regulations from National Bank, for instance, put provisions for discussions for such huge strategic investments. If they really come up with such huge deals, so we are ready to sit and discuss.
So my last question for you, Dr. Fitsum. A lot of people think of the climate agenda or climate solutions as far off, particularly when it comes to developing countries. Sometimes we also hear that domestically, that there are other priorities. But you have mentioned already the impact of climate change really on smallholder farmers. At every level, we're impacted by climate change. The latecomer advantage for Ethiopia. how confident are you that we're able to balance our development aspirations and our industrialization aspirations together with addressing the climate agenda?
Lots of people think, including myself, probably 5 years ago, I remember while preparing to craft the 10 years development plan, several actors, so to speak, come, actors in the economy come and raise their concern on one side regarding being, climate smart, costs, and it has trade-off. But on the other end, NGOs, development partners, people from academia come for climate advocacy, to influence our decisions on the 10 years development plan. So one thing I did was setting up a team to really help me come up with evidence to convince our policymakers, to convince our leaders to really be climate smart and really build green economy and show them that being climate smart doesn't have cost and there is no trade-off. You can still grow, still develop, but at the same time be sustainable. Mm-hmm. So we successfully commissioned a study on that, and the numbers spoke. So for us, being climate smart is even produces more benefits and really more growth than being
business as usual.
Business as usual, and really work on the conventional and sustainable way of bringing about growth. So it was backed by such evidence. So that's why Ethiopian government and our policies, our vision, and our development plans are well mainstreamed and include, building climate resilience as one of its top priorities. So, yeah, we can be climate smart, we can be sustainable, but at the same time deliver development to our people.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fitsum.
Thank you so much.